Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the next installment of my, I guess probably it's going to be a fairly irregular series called Tarot to the Nines, where we are working our way through tarot and number and all that that entails. And this video I think is going to be a fairly short video because it's a bit of a laying the groundwork video before we start going into the number sequence and the clusters of numbers from 1 through to 9 and how that then plays out into all the other numbers. And the topic of this video, you can see it on the board behind me, is the mysterious, not Zorro, no, it's the mysterious zero and the exciting evolution of number. And look, I have along here a selection of cards from my modified Giant Rider-Waite, and I have to give credit to Jeff Burr of Tattooed Spirit for the inspiration to fill in the borders of the Rider-Waite in the elemental colours, because he has done something very similar with his Rider-Waite deck, although he's actually, I think, added in colouring into the card itself. I'm not brave enough to do that, so I have just done the borders, yeah, I'm quite pleased with them. So we'll be using those to illustrate various different videos in this series, but in this video we are going to talk about the number sequence, but we're also going to talk about the Fool and zero, and what zero means within the tarot, and indeed what zero means in itself. Now, if you hear distant strains of music, it's because somewhere out there, isn't that a Linda Ronstadt song? Somewhere out there, somebody is having some kind of party, or I don't know, but there's some music that's wafting. It's very nice music, but if you hear it, that's what it is. Maybe we should have music for this series. Maybe we should have a jingle for the series. What do you think? Tarot to the Nines. Maybe not. I won't inflict my singing on you. So that will be the one and only time you hear the Tarot to the Nines jingle. So commit it to memory because it's gone now. So we are going to be talking about the sequence of numbers and zero. And I'll start off by talking about zero, I think. So let's have a look at our friend the Fool. The zero card, stepping out of, well, stepping out of what? That's part of the question, really. So it's maybe worth beginning the conversation and the discussion about zero by, maybe it's worth mentioning a couple of the mathematical properties of zero. And interestingly, zero as a figure, zero as a number concept, it's not really a number, of course, it's the absence of numbers, is relatively new in mathematical terms. So it's only been in common usage, I believe, in the last 700 years or so, which not new by our standards, but new in terms of, certainly a lot newer than all of the other numbers, which have gone through various incarnations and different cultures have indicated numbers in different ways. But zero itself was developed partly as a way of acting as a placeholder for, I'll describe that in a second, in terms of being able to illustrate when numbers were increasing without having to then invent lots of new figures for the numbers. But it also has some very interesting mathematical properties, and I think it's worth bearing them in mind, because although there are metaphysical writings about zero, it's worth considering the mathematical writings, because they, I think, tell us something about how zero behaves and how it might behave actually in a tarot reading. So one thing about zero that you all will be aware of, is very elementary maths, is if you add zero to any other number, that number stays. So the sum of zero plus anything else is the anything else. So if I take a 1 and add 0 to it, I get 1. If I take 105 and add 0 to it, I get 105. So adding 0 to something doesn't change the overall number. So in that sense, what we might be able to deduce is that zero is what we often think of zero as being, which is nothing. But zero isn't just nothing, because it has other properties as well. So if I multiply something by 0, I get nothing. So in that sense, what zero does is it obliterates the other number. So if I have 75 and multiply it by 0, I get 0. If I have 5,075,000,075 and multiply it by 0, I get 0. So in that sense, 0 is, it's not nothing, it's almost like, the abyss. It's almost like it has the ability to swallow other numbers up and completely obliterate them. So in the first example where it adds itself, it kind of deletes itself at the same time. And in the second example, it just deletes everything. It just is the abyss that swallows everything up. Then the other way that 0 is used is, let me grab a pen, is often, now let me just check you can see. So if we start off with the number 1, before 0 came along, in order to indicate 1 to the power of 10, say, everything depended on where in a line of numbers you placed the 1, and different cultures have used different conventions for showing the order of magnitude of numbers. So maybe they would have a list of numbers and they put little symbols next to it, or something that would tell you that that number was to the power of something. When 0 came along, what we are able to do is simply say, if I want to show that I've got more than 1, in fact I'm multiplying it by 10, so I've got 10, that multiple, I just need to add a 0. And then if I want to show that I've multiplied by 100, I just need to add another 0, and 1,000, etc. So 0 has the ability to hold a place in a line of numbers to indicate that the order of magnitude of numbers has increased. So we've gone from 1 to 1,000 just by adding 3 zeros as symbols. Now, what that does is, maybe one way of thinking about it is that it's not acting as nothing, it's not acting as the abyss, it's acting almost like everything. It's the all. So 0 manages to indicate vast numbers. It starts off as nothing, and then it can indicate vast numbers as well. So so this is a very interesting property of 0. It can be all of these things. It can be nothing, it can be everything, it can be the abyss that swallows everything up. And that's worth bearing in mind, because when you start thinking about how it functions in tarot, then that maybe tells us something about the property of the Fool and how it operates within a tarot reading. Because the Fool is it's a very mysterious and ambiguous card. I mean, they're all mysterious in some ways, but the Fool, I think, is one of the most mysterious and ambiguous cards, because it has no number. It is 0. And what is the Fool exactly? It just begs the question, what does the Fool actually mean? So let's clear a bit of a space on the board, and I want to just illustrate something for you about, look, 0 is swallowing everything up into the abyss. One minute there are things on the board, and the next minute there's nothing on the board. Very illustrative of what we're talking about. So, sorry Fool, I've just thrown the Fool aside. Let's not do that. So, the Fool in tarot. What does it mean? What can it mean? So, thinking about the property of 0. One way to think about it, and some metaphysical teachers do think about it this way, is that 0 represents the void. It represents the absolute. It represents the cosmic egg. It represents the womb of creation, just even in the shape of it. Because nothing can exist. No thing can exist without 0 existing. Because you can't have a thing without there also being a concept of no thing. Because it doesn't make sense. If you have a thing but you don't have the concept of no thing, then how do you know that there is a thing? You can't then put boundaries around that thing, you can't compare it with anything. So it's impossible to conceive of a thing without simultaneously conceiving of no thing. And you might even go so far as to say that the concept of no thing and the concept of thing are born together. They're mutually arising, because one of them implies the other. And from a metaphysical point of view, that is really quite important, because it's necessary for us to have a no thing in order for us to have the thing, the one. The one exists in the no thing, and then the one, of course, as we'll see in the sequence of numbers, is able to move on and become 2, and then it can become 3, etc., etc., and we go on and on from there. And in doing that, of course, you know, when it's born, when a thing is born, the no thing disappears because we now have things. But let's go back a little bit further. I mentioned that you can't have a thing, you can't have a no thing without the concept of a thing. So one of the things that's quite kind of interesting to look at is there something prior to zero? And let me just read you a little bit from the 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏. There's a lovely passage in the 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏. This is from the Stephen Mitchell translation of the 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 by Lao Tzu, and this is the fourth passage, the fourth verse. The Tao, which means, you know, in the sense of the Tao, is the way, the way of things, the way. I can't even put it into words because the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. That's from the first verse. So from the fourth verse it says, the Tao is like a well, used but never used up. It is like the eternal void, filled with infinite possibilities. The eternal void. It is hidden but always present. I don't know who gave birth to it. It is older than God. And actually I've got here some cards from the 𝗷𝗏𝗏𝗏 tarot, which many of you will be familiar with. And here is the Fool in the 𝗷𝗏𝗏𝗏 tarot. But this is not the first of the majors in this tarot. In fact, there are two before it. Just before the Fool, we have manifestation. So this is, if you like, thingness and no thingness coming into being. But there is a card before that as well, and it is the void. So what this tarot is implying is that before you have the Fool, before you have manifestation, you have the void. And I think the Fool in tarot is sometimes seen as the void, but the way I think about the Fool is, here is someone who is stepping out of the void into the world of duality. Because we live in a world of duality. Thing, no thing. Up, down, left, right. Good, bad, dark, light, etc., etc. We can't exist in this world without being in duality. But what metaphysical teachers will tell us is that there is a non-duality, a wholeness that exists prior to all of that. And I always think about the Fool as being thingness and no thingness stepping out of the void. So we've got the Fool literally stepping off the cliff. So 1,000 things are born from one thing, and the Fool is the representation of that act of creation. Now let me just find you another book. This is an old book by Leonard Bosman, who is a theosophist, and he has his book is called The Meaning and Philosophy of Numbers, and it's very heavy going, quite heavy reading, but it's worth having a look at, very interesting. And he describes in this the zero as being the absolute, the no number, the circle of potential. And he talks about there being a prior to creation and then creation, and the act of creation is where the zero springs from and where everything else springs from. Now, there is a kind of inherent contradiction in this, because I know a lot of people will think, but the zero surely represents that nothingness. But going back to what I said before, you can't have nothingness without thingness. So the void is more mysterious than simply a zero. So I just like to remind people when we're talking about the Fool is coming from somewhere. So if the Fool is zero, where is the Fool coming from? I will leave you that to ponder. But let's talk a little bit about how the Fool acts in reading. So I talked about that mathematical representation of zero, where, you know, if you add it to something, it just kind of deletes itself and leaves the thing intact. If you multiply things by zero, it obliterates them. So depending on where the Fool is in your reading and the context you have given the place that the Fool appears, it can have a number of different properties. And it's one of these cards that really, in a very literal sense, is neither positive nor negative, because if you think about it, zero exists on the number scale exactly between positive numbers and what we might call negative numbers. So the Fool in itself is not positive or negative. And I know that no card is inherently positive or negative, but I think it's inescapable that certain cards come with certain tones that we respond to. And depending on the context will depend on how we interpret those tones, but the Fool is really unfathomable. The Fool is something that is just so outside of our normal experience because it is neither positive nor negative, and so much depends on the context of the reading. And of course the Fool can represent a very literal meaning of foolishness, you know, in the sense of we sometimes think of a fool as being somebody who is stupid, who is doing something foolhardy, doing something that might cause them harm. And the Fool can represent that in a reading, there's no doubt. But the Fool can also represent somebody who's incredibly wise, that kind of ascended, guru-like, Buddha-like being who is so enlightened that they are utterly, utterly innocent. And the Fool can represent that kind of energy as well. So, as with all cards, but certainly with the Fool, context is everything. Context is everything. So, I think it's quite interesting to consider when you look at the way that the zero works and the fact that zero is necessary to exist before all other numbers, but it's worth bearing in mind that we still haven't got to the heart of the mystery. There is something prior to zero, and a non-dualist would say that, you know, the thing that is prior to zero, the thing that is prior to everything, is the thing that we are, the thing that everything is, the thing that everything springs from, including the Fool. So that's a little bit about zero. I'm going to wipe the board clean and then we're going to talk a little bit about the sequence of numbers. Back in a second. Okay, so finally in this video I just want to talk to you a little bit about the development of number, because obviously in tarot, both in the major arcana and in the minor arcana, we are aware that cards follow in sequence. In the majors from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then into all the other numbers up to the world at 21. And in the minors from 1 to 10, and then we have the court cards. So number is very important in tarot. And the development of number is very important in tarot. And as we go through each of the number clusters, I'm going to be talking to you about the various meanings that each number can have. But before we do that, I thought it would be worth just having an overview, because one of the tips I would give you as you're thinking about tarot and number is to consider that within the tarot we are often being pointed to where we are in a continuum of time, in a continuum of thought, in a continuum of concept, in a continuum of emotion, etc., etc. And in a continuum of element, of spirit, anything you want to imagine, really. And when we see particular numbers coming up in a tarot reading, it's important to think about which part of the continuum do they represent. And, you know, if it's a minor card, then obviously which suit. Now, in these cards here, I have not put a sequence of the same suit. I've shown you an example of the ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 from all 4 suits. Mainly because I want to show off the pretty colours of my cards, but also because I don't want to just limit things to one suit. What I want to show you really is that in each suit, but also across the whole of the tarot, we are looking at sequences, we are looking at developments, and the development of number is very important. Now there are many resources on number. There are 2 I'm going to wholeheartedly recommend to you for the purposes of getting your own handle on number. And one is a book by my friend Tom Benjamin, who has a YouTube channel of his own. I shall link his channel below. And he has put together this book, Tarot on Earth, A Practical Approach to the Cards, which is an excellent book. And it works mainly on the basis of looking at, well, any tarot deck can be looked at through the lens of this book. But he, as you can tell from the card on the cover, does focus rather on the Marseille or the pip card, or unillustrated pips. And one of the reasons he does that is he quite rightly points out that actually that allows you to look at numbers in a slightly purer sense than if you're using illustrated cards, because the illustrated pips do tend to fix the meaning in a particular way. But we'll come on to that as we go through the cards. And one of the exercises he has in this book, which I highly recommend that you get and highly recommend that you do, is to develop your own relationship to number. And he suggests that you do some some research on number, you read books about number, you watch video series like this one on number, and you distill all the things you learn about number based on the things you've read, but also your own experience of tarot readings, so that you develop your own understanding of what oneness is. So what do the aces mean? What is oneness? What is two-ness? What is three-ness? What do they mean in the different contexts? So that's a very worthwhile exercise and a very, very good book. Highly recommended. And the other one, I spoke there about oneness and two-ness and three-ness and so on, and that is a language that's used very much in this book by Gail Fairfield, Choice-Centered Tarot, which has been republished as Everyday Tarot. So again, well worth getting. And she actually talks about the development of number in a very interesting way. So she talks about cycles of three. So she says that the ones, the twos and the threes are in the minor arcana are the first cycle of three. That's the conceptual level where something is conceived and articulated. And then we have 4, 5 and 6, which is the second cycle of three, the actualized level where something is manifested and adjusted. Then we have 7, 8, 9, which is the third cycle of three. That's the expanded level where something is developed, explored and expanded. And then we have 10, which is the transition point, which you'll see I put there slightly above, because 10 is the movement to, is the completion of the sequence. You could argue that 9 is the completion of the sequence, because 10 is actually reduces to 1. So we're back onto the next level. We've gone back to 1, but at a different level is one way of looking at it. 1 plus 0 is 1. It's the completion and also the beginning of a new cycle. But she talks about 10 being the transition point. Something has been successfully developed. You have a choice about what to do with it. And 10ness is about transition. And then you have the fourth cycle of 3, and this is where the court cards come in. And we're not going to be looking at court cards in the context of number, but I will do a video on court cards as part of this series. But she talks about the page, king and queen, sorry, the page, knight and queen being the fourth cycle of 3, the fulfilled level, where something reaches its full potential and maturity, and then the king being the completion point. You've completed a cycle that began at the ace, you're ready to let go of the past and begin a new cycle. So she goes all the way through into the court cards. Others stick with the concept of the number, the 10 being that completion point. There are different ways of looking at it. You've got to find what works for you. But just very briefly, what I want to do is just note for you how I've kind of conceived of number over many years of working with tarot. And this is drawn partly from the work of writers like Gail Fairfield and others and my own observations. But I think of ones as beginnings, seeds, points. So that's the aces. Remember the point that appeared in the middle of the 0, that emerged from the 0? The 0 emerges from the void, and then as it is born, as nothing is born, so thing is born. So we have a point. 2s are about pairings, choices, balance, duality. Although you could argue that duality actually is introduced even earlier, because duality is introduced the moment you have no thing and thing. But certainly pairing and choices and balance. And now we can have a line, because we have 2 points that we can draw a line between. 3s are about growing, triangulation, a triangle, and a plane. And with a triangle we can actually create a plane, so a flat surface. We have 3 points now to join up. And when we think about the Empress in tarot, of course, growing and the abundance of the Empress, then it really fits with that. 4 is about stabilizing. You now are able to have a foundation, because you can have a solid. You've got 4 points, you can have a solid, something that is actually able to stand. Then 5s, we know of course with the 5 of Pentacles, one of the most apparently difficult cards in the pack, that 5s are problematic, and 5s in the other suits can be problematic too. I think of 5s as disruption and challenge, and 5 can also represent time, because we're in the 5th dimension now. We've got 4 dimensions when we have a solid, and we're in the 5th dimension, time. And of course, you know, you could argue that time is the big problem in this dualistic world, because time is the thing, it's that old riddle, you know, what is it that eats everything? Time. There is nothing in this universe that will be saved from the erosion of time. Ultimately, everything that exists now in the sense of time will change form, will die, will change form, will be disrupted by time. Very cheery. 6s, we've been disrupted, so now we need a rebalancing. And because we have been through the experience of building and laying a foundation and then being disrupted, we now know that we can go through that cycle. So we are able to say that we can set up a rhythm, and we are aware of the concept of cycle. So that's what 6s are about. Then 7, we're on to an entirely different level, where it's not just this kind of experience of motion and sequence and cycle, but we are now able to imagine. We've been through all of that, so we now have the ability to imagine all of that. So we can we're in the realm of imagining. It can be about reflection on this process, and it can be about expansion from there. So we now are able to conceive of how to build and how to plan, etc., etc. So from there we move to 8, which is about it's a double 4, so it's even more stabilizing. So this is about making a commitment. It's about reorganizing and restabilizing, making a commitment and creating order, real order. So 8s are powerful cards, and of course, if you're looking at the Риder-Waite-Smith system of the 8 being strength, that's a very powerful card, but so is justice, if you're looking at justice as being the 8. Either way, those cards are strong cards. And then 9 is about, you've been through all of this, you've been through the sequence twice, if you like, of that building and then being disrupted and rebuilding. So now we're able to integrate, we're able to create our own forward motion. So 9 can give us a final push, and you might even say that 9 is the end of that sequence, because we have now reached the end of the base numbers, and so there is no new number now after 9, because 10 is, as we said in the 0 section, is 1 with the 0 next to it to show that we have now got 10 as a number, and that represents a new cycle in my thinking about tarot in terms of the way that number works. And of course 10 in the major arcana is the Wheel of Fortune, so where things shift and change for good or ill. So that's just a very rough run through of my concept of numbers. So I am going to give you a little bit of homework before the next video, and really it's just to do exactly as I have said others have recommended, Tom recommended in his book, and I've asked you to do. I think you should get your favourite tarot deck out, maybe get more than one of them out, and just set aside, for the time being, set aside the court cards. And I want you to lay out the first 9 cards of the major arcana and the first 9 cards of each of the suits. And I want you to group them together, so you've got all the 1s together and all the 2s together and 3s, 4s, up to 9. And I want you to just meditate on them. Get a notebook ready and just sit and look at the cards. Maybe set them up in different piles, so you look at all the 1s first and then all the 2s. Spend time on them, spend as much, maybe a day on each of them. So maybe one day, there are 7 days in the week, so maybe you could spend a week and 2 days. The first day you look at the 1s, the aces and the magician. The second day the 2, etc., etc. And you just jot notes. What do you notice about number? What do you notice about the connections between the cards? And that is your homework before we move on to the next video in Tarot to the Nines. So I hope that's been helpful. If you've got any questions about any of the things I've spoken about, please do drop a comment below. I'm still working on getting the Facebook group up and running, so when it's up and running I shall post a link below all the videos actually. So if you're watching this many years from the time I record it, then by then the Facebook group should certainly be up. So look below this video and you'll find a link. If you're watching it in real time and you're one of the first people to view it, then it might not be up, but it's coming soon, I promise. So thank you all very much for your time and for your forbearance. I hope that made sense. And now we have laid the foundations well and truly, so we can start moving into the numbers, the constellations. And we'll begin, of course, at the very beginning. Or is it the very beginning? Number 1. We know from what we said about 0, 1 isn't the beginning. See you soon.